What is up, guys? Eric here from Real Film Reviews, bringing you another movie review, this time for the new Josh Brolin film, Sicario, The Day of the Soldado. Sicario, The Day of the Soldado is the highly anticipated sequel to the 2015 film Sicario, which was actually my favorite movie of 2015. The sequel stars Benicio del Toro and Josh Brolin returning to their roles from the first film, and Isabella Moner. This film takes place in the present-day United States of America, where after a terror attack happens, and it comes out that one of the perpetrators of the attack was helped across the border by a Mexican drug cartel. The cartels are then put on a list of terrorist organizations, which means that the way that the US government is able to combat them changes. So they bring on Josh Brolin to basically build a team to help try to fight these cartels. And by doing that, they want to start a war between the cartels by kidnapping one of the biggest cartel leaders' daughters. Now, I do honestly think that the plot of this film is one of the strengths of it, because it takes real world things that are going on actually and then turns them into a very engaging and interesting narrative of how the United States could theoretically combat this enemy if they had the opportunity to do so. And I found that really cool, because it wasn't something where with the first film where it was just like, there's a drug war happening where cartels are continuing to funnel drugs over the border. This one was very much taking a look at things happening in the United States that are consistently spoken about in politics and in the world, and choosing to decide which to focus on and how to make that a plot of the film. Now, obviously, Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro are absolutely phenomenal coming back in this film. I still stand by the fact that I think Benicio del Toro should have won an Oscar for the first Sicario film for supporting actor. He was amazing in that movie, and I think both of them bring their A game again to these roles in this movie. Both of them are these very hardened men who have done and seen horrible things in their lives, yet this film is able to humanize them a little bit more, and I really loved that because we got to see some emotion, we got to learn more about the two of them and how they work together, and I really thought that the way that they created the relationship between the two of them in this film, because in the first one they were very much like these secretive characters, and now that we know more about them after seeing the first film, it's really interesting to see how they actually bounce off one another and how they work together. Just like the first film, this movie has very brutal and quick and poignant action strewn throughout it, and this film actually does have a lot more action than the first. Not that it's overdone and it's oversaturated with action and doesn't focus on the story, there just is definitely more of it because we're following the characters that are creating the plan rather than someone who was just part of it as we did with the first film. Visually, I think Stefano Sollima did a good job directing this film. Obviously, he had basically impossible shoes to fill trying to take over for Denis Villeneuve, who directed the first one, who is a master director and is arguably the best director in Hollywood right now visually, and I think he really did his best to fill those shoes. He did a very admirable job. There are some things in the action or the quick cuts in certain sequences that I felt like weren't as good as the first, but I do think for the person he was taking over for, he did a very good job with this movie. And then while I do have some issues in the script that I will get to, there's one specific scene that's in this movie that takes place in the desert in this small house, and it is one of the best scenes between both films, which is a bold statement because I think the first Sicario is a perfect film. That movie's a 10 out of 10. I love that movie so much. And I really think that this sequence that happens at this house helps humanize and also make characters more intense at the same time. And I really, really adored that scene. If you see this movie, I'm sure you know the scene that I'm talking about, but it's absolutely phenomenal. And then as for the issues that I do have with the film, I think for the most part, they're more or less script related, which is surprising because this movie is written by Taylor Sheridan, who wrote the first, and I think he's a very talented writer. But I do think that in the beginning of this film, it's a little bit choppy. It kind of jumps around all over the place to set up the plot, but it doesn't feel like it's doing it smoothly. It's like we jump from one location to another, to another, to another, until we finally sort of have the story where it needs to be, so that way it can start progressing. And in the beginning, it wasn't that it worked poorly, it was more just that it felt very much so like it was cut together sequences to put a story together, rather than it was written as a smooth story. And then there are also two new characters that are introduced in this film, played by Catherine Keener and Matthew Modine, and I think that both of them do a completely fine job in the movie for the role that they play, but they just didn't really get any backstory. We didn't really get to learn much about the characters at all, And for the very, very big role that they play in the story, they also have very little screen time. And I thought that was very odd because anytime they showed up, they were these big characters of authority who had power, yet they were so rarely seen throughout the story that when they did show up, I was kind of just like, oh yeah, I forgot that that guy's like kind of part of this and like he's kind of why this is going on or something like that. And I really think that they should have been more involved in the story and the process and what's going on, so that way they would have felt more sort of like involved, because otherwise they just sort of showed up and were bossy to the characters that we were seeing consistently, and they didn't feel like part of the story. And then the last issue I had is there's one plot device in the film that I can't talk about because it's a spoiler, but it was very reminiscent of something from the first film, and I thought it was rather predictable where it was going, and it was sort of disappointing because I thought in the first film it worked so well, and in this one it felt too similar. It was still good, but it was just kind of one of those things where if you've seen the first, you can probably sort of guess where it's going to go. I'm gonna give Sicario: The Day of the Soldado a B+. Sicario 1 was my favorite film the year that it came out. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal, and I think The Day of the Soldado is a worthy sequel, which is something that is rarely accomplished in Hollywood. It helped capture the raw thrills and the intensity of the first one, and I found that to be very impressive, and I very much enjoyed the film. Well guys, as always, I'm Eric. If you enjoyed this video, please do like, subscribe, comment down below what you thought of Sicario: The Day of the Soldado, share everything we do here on Real Film Reviews, and I hope to see you guys later.